Hey guys, and welcome to episode 2 of Patch Stories, where we share the inspiration, ideas, and a little bit of the heart behind some of the sounds we release here at Sunday Sounds. In today's video, I'm going to be sharing a little bit of a behind-the-scenes look at some of the new instruments that are a part of Sunday Keys 2021. All of these new sounds were added in the November update to Sunday Keys 2021, which is now available to all Sunday Keys 2021 owners at no additional charge. So let's get into some of these new sounds. I can't wait to share the stories behind them with you. Okay folks, so let's start off with a layered patch breakdown. I'm going to show you 5 distinct individual instruments, give you a sentence or two about each of them, and then show you how they all came together to create a new layered patch. Let's start off with this soft piano instrument. Now, in Sunday Keys 2021, we added the new Sunday Grand and Sunday Upright pianos, both consisting entirely of custom piano samples. We've added the soft piano voice now to the Sunday Grand instrument. The soft piano is great for moments where you need something a little bit more delicate that still has a little bit more width and sense of space than an upright piano. The soft piano uses samples from the Sunday Grand and it sounds awesome. This is what it sounds like. Next up is a brand new pad in Sunday Keys called the Super String Pad. This is a custom sampled pad where we combined a bunch of analog synth samples together to create one super lush unison synth pad. Check it out. Next is one of my favorite new additions to Sunday Keys in the November update. It's called the Condition Bass. The Condition Bass is a really cool synth bass sound that I sampled myself from my Behringer Model D analog synthesizer. I used a couple of detuned square waves along with a little bit of noise in the attack to get this really cool, bright, powerful bass sound. It's just really awesome. Check it out. Next up is a live sequence called Time Cave Sequence. Now, I'm not a huge video gamer. I don't play games all the time, but I have a couple that I'm really partial to. This patch was inspired by one of my favorite video games over the last several years, available for the Nintendo Switch. There's certain challenges inside of certain types of buildings. It's an open world game. You play as a very old, young-looking green clothed person. I'll let you figure out who it is. Anyways, this new live sequence is called Time Cave Sequence, and it was inspired by some of the sounds and textures that the soundtrack has in this particular game, again, which I'm not naming. This is what it sounds like. This is a live sequence, so you designate the key using the on-screen key selector, and then it plays back a sequence based on the left-hand bass notes that you press. There is a delay when you initially play a note and then when you hear the sequence play back, just so you're not confused when you see me play and nothing happens. So this is what it sounds like. Lastly, in this layered patch breakdown, we have a new Soundbed called Despair on Pluto. About 10 years ago, some folks I knew when I lived out in Colorado Springs had a band they put together called Cry for Pluto, and that was right when Pluto got downgraded. It was no longer a planet, which to me as a millennial is an absolute outrage. So this patch, the name was inspired by that band because it always made me giggle. So this is called Despair on Pluto. To design this sound, I took some piano samples, mangled them up, and ended up reversing them and then setting them in a repeating pattern. And that creates the basis of this new sound bed. Here's what it sounds like. Okay, now that we've broken down the individual components, let me show you what all of these individual sounds sound like in a layered patch. All right, the next story is about the Warm Digi Rhodes patch in Sunday Keys 2021. This is a digital electric piano sound that I sampled from my vintage DX7 synthesizer, which is actually what I'm using as a MIDI controller right here. When the DX7 was first released, it was an absolutely groundbreaking innovation in the synthesizer world, and some of the presets on this keyboard went on to be featured on countless albums. One thing about the DX7 was that it was pretty darn intimidating and inaccessible to program, so the presets themselves ended up being relied on by a lot of studio musicians and producers. So the end result was you heard a lot of the stock presets all over popular music for a couple of decades. And there's a specific EP preset inside the DX7 that you've heard on hundreds and hundreds of albums from both Christian and secular artists. It's super lush, really, really cool. So I went ahead and captured samples of that patch across multiple velocity layers, spanning the whole keyboard, and then did some additional processing to whiten them up and fatten them up a little bit. The output of the DX7 is mono, but I've added some stereo width to the way that the samples are panned, because it's something we can do inside of the software when we're building the instrument from the ground. So this is the Warm Digi Rhodes patch. Next, we have a new live groove called Washy Swing. Now, this is a 6/8 groove, and the reason I want to talk about this story is because we had requests in our Facebook communities for Sunday Keys users for more live grooves, and specifically live grooves that were in 6/8. And because we were releasing new sounds for Sunday Keys every other month throughout the lifespan of Sunday Keys 2021, we're able to really quickly take those requests and deliver on them. So this is the first of many to come 6/8 live grooves that's now available in Sunday Keys. Now, if you're not familiar with what live grooves are, they are pre-programmed patterns that actually play back in real time based on the bass note that you press, and you can adjust the tempo on the fly or in advance to whatever you need it to be. So now let me show you a layered patch that uses both the Warm Digi Rhodes and the Washy Swing live groove together, along with the super string pad and the conditioned bass that I showed you earlier in the video. Okay, next up, I want to share some of my favorite stories from the new batch of sounds that we released in November for Sunday Keys. These are the sounds that are in the experimental section, which is a new category that we added to Patch Builder in November. Now, we have all sorts of really cool, weird experimental sounds planned for this category, but the original idea behind me even thinking to add it to Patch Builder actually has a little bit more to do with my family life than anything else. See, my wife and I have 3 kids now, and they're all awesome. Our 5-year-old son, John, has just started kindergarten. So one thing that we've been doing is actually creating samples and instruments together over the last couple months as just a small part of what we're doing as part of his kindergarten curriculum. And the way that I've approached this initially is by using found sounds. So if you're not familiar with that term, that means you take a recorder. We have a Zoom stereo recorder that we use. You take it out somewhere and you literally just sample whatever sounds cool, and then you make it into a patch later. So a couple weeks ago, we spent some time at a family cabin up in northeastern Iowa, and it has a playground up there. And so we just took the recorder out there, and I told John, whatever sounds sound cool to you, let's just record them, let's sample them, and then we'll make some patches together. So we ended up grabbing a bunch of sounds, and we're just at the very beginning stages of processing them. But to start out with in this release, we did end up with a really cool sample that we grabbed from my son using a stick to hit a big old metal merry-go-round. It was nice and percussive, but it also had pitch. So we ended up, I showed him how to isolate that pitch using an EQ inside of Logic, and then we turned it into a sample-based synth, which is really cool. So there's a few different variants of that merry-go-round sample that are all in the experimental section of the November update to Sunday Keys. So I thought I'd show those to you really quick. The first is called Merry-Go-Round Chiff. It's sort of a lead sound with a lot of air and breath. Next up, we took the same sample source and then programmed an arpeggiated pattern around a modified version of the instrument. Next up, here's that same merry-go-round arp, layered with a couple other instruments from Sunday Keys, along with a new live groove that we added in November called Sub-Powered. This one's super cool, and you can hear how you might use this experimental arp sound in an actual live context. And then lastly, one more experimental sound, still from this same single merry-go-round sample. We ended up adding a bunch of reverb, washing out and reprocessing, ending up with a really, really cool sort of glass pad sound. This is merry-go-round pad. My favorite thing about this pad is we programmed the ADSR so that if you bring the mod wheel up and really dig in with velocity, you actually get some of that initial Chiff sort of attack back, which is really, really cool because if you play quietly, it's really subtle. And if you hammer in there, then you can get a little bit of that extra bit of initial attack back into the sound. I really, really like the way this pad turned out, and you'd never know it was from a single sample unless you were told. Okay, next up, another patch in the experimental category. I'm on a real big family kick this year. This is called Wells Soundbed. We actually grabbed this sound, John and I, during one of our found sound sampling sessions. I think it was actually right around the same time that we grabbed that merry-go-round sample. But this is actually a vocal sample of my son Wells, who is 2, saying one of his favorite catchphrases, which is him walking into a room or into a group of people and saying, "Hi, babies." Because he just thinks that's a really funny phrase to say. We're not sure where he got it. Anyways, we happened to get a recording of him saying that, and then we chopped it up, pitch shifted it so it was all tuned to the same note. Then we washed it out with a bunch of stereo delay, reverb, and some modulation, and it ended up being this really cool sort of vocal style sound bed, like something you hear from Bon Iver or something like that. It's really, really cool, and it's, again, from a single sample of my 2-year-old's voice, which just makes me feel really good. It's really fun to hear that. I'm gonna play it all washed out, and then I'll bring the reverb back a little bit so you can actually hear some of the vocal inflection of the original sample as well. Okay, next up, we've got 2 more patches from the experimental section. The first one is called Mary's Harp Soundbed, and it was actually created with samples I captured from this guy, which was my grandma Mary's auto harp. Now, my grandma Mary, my dad's mom, passed away in the 90s, and when she did, this went to the family and eventually ended up in my family, and I love this little auto harp. It's such a cool sound. It's got all these chord buttons. If you're not familiar with what an auto harp is, you hold down a chord and then you're able to strum and hear this sort of jangly resonant chord. And that's how you play a whole song. There's a billion strings and they go out of tune super easily, so it's not a great instrument to play. I wanted to use this instrument to grab some cool samples because it has this really cool resonant body, and you can sort of tune the sympathetic resonance by holding down these chord buttons. So what I did is I grabbed a mallet here, and then I would hold down a chord button, and then I would actually strike a note, like that. And I grabbed a ton of samples at multiple velocity layers across the whole auto harp. It really sounds like a hybrid between a dulcimer and a harpsichord, which I just think sounds really, really cool. But for this sound bed, I actually did some note trilling. Like that, just bunches of samples of this note being sort of sporadically droned. And that ended up making a really, really cool patch. So this is Mary's Harp sound bed. Okay, and then the last patch story today is another variant of samples I grabbed from Mary's Harp. Now this is just called Mary's Harp Alpha. And the reason it's an alpha is because I've got a lot of work to do left cleaning up all of these multi-samples that I grabbed from my grandma's auto harp. But I do have an alpha build of this one instrument called Mary's Harp that features samples from this auto harp. Again, it feels sort of like a dulcimer and harpsichord somewhere in between there. It's going to end up a fully multi-sampled instrument across the whole keyboard, but for now, there's an alpha version inside of Sunday Keys that just consists of several velocities at middle C stretched up across the keyboard. So I think even with that single note sample source at the multiple velocities, it sounds really cool. There's some layered patches that it sounds really nice in, playing the part of a dulcimer. Because of that hammer strike that I used when I grabbed the samples, there's lots of initial tack and bite, which is really, really nice when you layer it with a piano or an electric piano. All right, folks, so that wraps up episode 2 of Patch Stories. If this is a video format you like, leave a comment and a thumbs up on this video to let us know. It's really fun for me to both know that I'm going to be able to share some of the stories behind these patches, but it's also inspiring me to seek out new sound design ideas that will have cool stories behind them. Instruments like my grandma's auto harp, things that have some meaning to me or some significance to an event in my life or my family. It's really fun to know that I have this venue to be able to share a little of the insight behind. If you want to learn more about Sunday Keys itself, all of the sounds that I showed you in this Patch Stories video were released to Sunday Keys 2021 owners as part of the November Sound Update. Every other month, we release a new batch of sounds to Sunday Keys 2021 owners, so there will be another update coming in January 2021 and another Patch Stories video to go along with it at that time. So again, check out the link in the description if you want to learn more about the Sunday Keys template. It's available in MainStage and Ableton Live formats. Have a great day.